To get that briefing, a pair of guests join us now. First, my former colleague from the House, the former chairman of the Intelligence Committee there within the House of Representatives, Pete Hoekstra, who is Skyping in this morning from Colorado. And meantime, from outside Washington, D.C., Cheryl Chumley, the staff writer for the Washington Times, author of the book Police State USA, How Orwell's Nightmare is Becoming Our Reality. Both Cheryl and Pete, we thank you very much for appearing on America's Forum. And Pete, let me go to you. Lindsey Graham invokes the intelligence community, saying ISIS intends to strike us here. What's your assessment of that threat?
Well, I think that's absolutely accurate. Whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's ISIS, ISIL, Islamic State, whatever you want to call it, all of them have an objective of having a global influence and creating a global footprint. That means they're going to attack in Europe. That means they want to attack in the United States. It may not be at the top of their priority list right now with all the progress that they're making in Northern Africa, the progress that they're making throughout the Middle East, but it is very much near the top of their list, but maybe not at the exact top. But no, they're coming and they want to attack us.
Cheryl, you've been concentrating on domestic law enforcement, but do you share a concern about ISIS ending up with attacks here in the United States?
Definitely. I share the views that were your other panelists just said. And specifically to add to that, I would like to say that I think the White House, the Obama administration, has seriously underestimated the threat from radical Islamism. And that's something that Capitol Hill hearings, specifically conservatives on Capitol Hill, have been bringing forward in recent years. And I think what's going on right now in Iraq is just evidence of the weakness of the White House administration on the international arena, and this is what's resulting. We're being threatened on our own soil by radical Islam.
So you both think, go ahead, Pete.
JD, it's estimated that there's over 200 Americans that have traveled to Syria and to Iraq to join ISIS, and over 2,000 Europeans. That's the threat, the avenue for these people to come back to Europe and to come back to the United States.
And also there is our border, and Lindsey Graham, he lays out the threat from ISIS, but then he's one of these guys, part of the Gang of Eight in terms of amnesty. He doesn't seem to connect the dots. Texas Governor Rick Perry at least has the National Guard down on the Texas border. What else is needed now to address the issue of border security? Pete, first to you.
Well, the issue of border security, the ones that concern me the most right now, JD, are the 200 plus Americans that have gone to Syria. They carry American passports. The 2,000 that have gone from Europe, they carry passports from our allies in Europe. They have easy access back into the United States. The FBI and our law enforcement needs to do everything that they can to track these people who have left and to identify them when they come back into the United States. Other folks will try to cross our borders illegally across our southern border. So increasing border security there is also essential.
Cheryl, as Pete was giving us his assessment, we saw scenes of the National Guard moving in there on the Texas-Mexico border. The Guard simply there as observers. Before we get to what's transpiring with police on the interior of the country, what should we be doing on our southern border, Cheryl?
Well, one low cost, no cost actually action that we could be taking right now is for the White House to issue a clear communication to the international community that we are not going to accept illegal border crossers without turning them back. That wouldn't take much more than a couple of straight talking messages directly from President Obama, and to send to especially those in Central America that the minor age children that are flowing across the borders in massive scores right now, they will be sent back. They will not be given amnesty in this nation, and taxpayers will not bear the burden for them.
Well, Cheryl, you mentioned a direct message from the President of the United States, of course. From his vacation spot in Martha's Vineyard yesterday, our president had a direct statement for what was transpiring in Ferguson, Missouri. Pete, to you first. We've seen a change there. Governor Jay Nixon and others basically putting responsibility for policing in the hands of the Missouri State Police, Highway Patrol, rather than the Ferguson cops. That change, do you think that helped lead to the calm last night?
I think so. And the system and that part of the system is working exactly the way that it should. We found a local community police force that was kind of overwhelmed by the events of the last 3 or 4 nights. The governor decided that it was time for the state to step in. The governor then moved to bring the state police in. And that's the way that the process is supposed to work. What I was concerned about earlier in the week is you get the president involved, you get the attorney general involved, you get the FBI involved, all on this one case. I'm not saying this case isn't important, but federalizing this case from almost day one, I think escalated and helped create the kind of violence that you saw there for 3 days.
Cheryl, the police chief of Ferguson, took time out to criticize the president, saying that advice from Martha's Vineyard wasn't exactly helpful on the ground there in Ferguson. But that same police chief and police force has been criticized for the display of paramilitary protection and weapons and personnel carriers. Rand Paul talked about militarizing the police. Now, you wrote a book, Police State USA. Did the Ferguson cops showing up with tactical gear, did that inflame the situation?
I think so. I don't think that the local police had to resort so quickly to placing armored vehicles in the streets. There could have been a happy medium where if they felt the need to use armored vehicles and outfit their officers in camo uniforms, carrying high-powered weapons and so forth, they could have had a little bit of stand-back perimeter type reaction. But instead, the video, at least that I saw of the scene, showed the police with their armored vehicles marching toward protesters, firing tear gas. We saw videos of journalists being targeted and so forth. And it just seemed like there could have been a little bit stand down on the police response, as we're seeing now, that could have done a lot more to keep the protests peaceful.
Well, Cheryl, we're hearing today that the Ferguson police are preparing to release the name of the officer involved in the shooting of the unarmed teen. Do you expect that to exacerbate tensions in Ferguson?
I actually don't. I think there's been enough talk about the name of the officer in recent days that most people, the anger that they feel toward this officer has probably been vented during protests. I think the officer will receive protection right away. And I think there will be some who take to social media and Twitter and so forth and express anger at the officer. But I don't predict any more protests in the streets going violent just because of the release of the officer's name.
Pete, a few short years ago, you and I at this time of year would be wrapped up in congressional campaigns trying to maintain our seats in the United States House of Representatives. Now, politically speaking, yesterday we had Senator Rand Paul criticizing the, quote, militarization of the police. In the wake of what's happened in Ferguson, A, do you think they were in fact militarized? And nationally, in terms of politics, is this an issue where the right and the left meet concern about domestic police power?
I think it is a possibility where the left and the right can meet. And, not being in Ferguson, it makes it just very, very difficult to evaluate the tactics that the police force used earlier this week. What we do know, and if you take a look at, the southern border, and I experienced it in your very state. I had one of my constituents who was gunned down along the border because he was working for the National Park Service, and he was outgunned by one of the drug cartels coming across the border. And so, there was just a story in the last couple of days about one of the new weapons of the cartels coming across the border are grenades. And so as our opposition gets more, as the criminals, the gangs get greater degree of weapons, more sophisticated weapons, law enforcement needs to keep up with that capability. It has to be a balanced approach and a balanced discussion before we move forward.
And we'll have to leave it right there. Cheryl Chumley, the author of Police State USA, we thank you for your input. I know we'll be talking again in the not too distant future. And Pete Hoekstra, we've got a couple of other topics we're going to have you weigh in on briefly, so keep that Skype line open. To you both again, our thanks. And once again, a reminder, For the latest on intelligence and analysis and forecasting, check out lignet.com. America's Forum comes right back.